The Tekken series is one of the most successful fighting game franchises of all time, spanning over 30 years as of the time of this video. It is one of the original 3D fighting games. In the mid-90s, 3D was more about using polygonal models than fighting on a 3D plane, though that limitation would be expanded by Tekken 3. From its beginnings in arcades to its current domination in the online fighting scene, there is no denying the success the Tekken franchise has achieved worldwide. And yet, I've come to realize that Tekken has strayed. Strayed from what, you ask? Let me explain what I mean, and to do that, I'll give you a brief background on my experience with the Tekken series. Like many other 90s kids, my first fighting game was Street Fighter 2 and its many derivatives like Champion Edition, Turbo, Super Turbo, and so on. Vega was my main, and I was one of the better players in my area, pissing off a lot of the older kids at the local college. Then came Mortal Kombat, though I wasn't as good at that game. I think, like a lot of others, I was just drawn to the gore, something that probably still holds true to this day for a lot of others. I was drawn to the lesser-known Art of Fighting series by SNK for its unique camera angles and gameplay features, being one of, if not the first, to incorporate a super meter. 3D seemed to be the next evolutionary step in the fighting game genre, and I became drawn to Virtua Fighter. I briefly practiced Chinese martial arts back in the day, so naturally I was drawn to the realism and fluidity of the moves by the characters in that game, as opposed to the unrealistic fighting and fantasy settings in previously mentioned games, with the 2D sprites. I loved how they represented various martial arts and techniques. Though the controls were somewhat clumsy by today's standards, I learned all the character moves and especially the throws. Virtua Fighter didn't have much of a competitive scene compared to Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat, so eventually I stopped playing as beating the AI got old quick. I never took interest in Street Fighter 3 or the Alpha series. I guess I felt like going back to 2D fighting games with sprites and fireballs or other silly projectiles that you wouldn't see in a real fight would be somewhat of a regression. Then one day, I came across an arcade, remember those? And Tekken 2. It immediately reminded me of Virtua Fighter, which makes sense as there are known collaborations between the two dev teams going back decades. I started learning Armor King and eventually all the other characters, fascinated for the same reasons I was drawn to Virtua Fighter. The realism, the moves, the fluidity, the different martial arts represented, it was all there. At the time, the fact that there was a couple of more unrealistic elements compared to Virtua Fighter, like a boxing kangaroo and Kazuya turning into a demon for the game's final boss, while admittingly silly, wasn't enough to distract me from everything else that was awesome about that game. Then came Tekken 3, which was for many their first entry into the series. Tag, Tekken 4, which to me is one of the more underrated games in this series for reasons I may explain in another video, and on through Tekken 5 Dark Resurrection. I was very active and competed in the local tournaments. I wasn't an EVO or any huge tournament like that, but I was always known as one of the better local players. I had a side hustle as a GameStop assistant manager, and finding highly skilled Tekken players came easy. However, shortly thereafter, I stopped playing, dropped the side hustle, and Tekken took a backseat to the rest of my life. I just didn't have the time to put in to stay at that level of competitiveness. Though I didn't play as much, I'd get copies of Tekken 6, Tag 2, and then Tekken 7, thinking I'd get the competitive itch again to one way jump back in the fray. I never did. Sometime between all these Tekken titles I wasn't playing, the Tekken Blood Vengeance DVD was released. Even though it wasn't a game, it confirmed what I suspected about the Tekken series all along. It was becoming more and more like a Japanese anime. Maybe I'm naive and this was always the direction of the series, but I certainly didn't get that feeling with the first few games, at least not until Tekken 5 TR. Now the fights all look like some kind of Dragon Ball Z sequence. Crazy space lasers and outer space battle sequences, crossover guest characters from TV shows, characters with chainsaws, and now multiple characters with swords and other weapons, Hadoukens, in a Tekken game. When the Tekken 8 trailers were coming out, I saw Nina's rage art, complete with weapons and guns. It was official to me that the Tekken I knew, or at least the Tekken I thought I knew, was gone. Now it's just flashy and kinda goofy, in my opinion. Question I want to ask the rest of you is, where is that pure martial art game? One that is more based on realism and real martial arts, and not crazy Japanese anime. I understand there's a market for that, and that's fine. But just wondering, would any of you play it? Is there an interest for that? Please let me know in the comments, and thanks for listening.